Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. So here's a bit of a dirty secret in software that maybe you're not aware of. And maybe this is why you're afraid of things like ChatGPT or O3, or whatever other AI tool people are telling you is going to take your job. It's because maybe you think that developers code all day long. The reality is we do a lot less coding than people probably think. And when I hear people say, I want to get into software because I don't like working with people, I immediately think, oh brother, this is a job that's basically all about people. So I want to go through a couple examples of what I really do as a developer in my job at both a startup and at a Fortune 500 company, one where I currently worked and one where I previously worked for 4 years, going from senior into a management position there. Now I'm back in a senior role at a very small startup. I want to go through what we really do during the day so you can have a good mental model of kind of what is an average developer's day like. Because too often when you look at YouTube or Twitter or whatever, you see all the highlights, somebody taking their coffee break in some beautiful office somewhere, right? Taking a break, or they're writing code at lightning speed in a hoodie or something like that. And then they're just going home and locking up their computer as if that's all we do. Reality is a little more boring and in some ways more interesting than what you can show in a 30-second clip on Instagram or Reels or TikTok or whatever other thing you're using to rot your brain. So there's a study that came out. This is software.com. I'm in the reports. And what it shows is that developers' median time that they've seen after looking at 250,000 developers and tracking their time, and maybe thinking, how the hell are you tracking their time? There's a tool that developers use and most software companies use. Any company that has a software team, they tend to use this tool called Jira. Jira is a way to track your work. You get like a ticket, quote unquote, basically this little card that's in this board that shows you like the status of your task you're doing. So it'll have maybe 100 tasks, maybe 200 tasks, maybe thousands of tasks. You'll be assigned one of those tasks. And what you'll do is you'll move that task across the board and say, here's when I'm done with this task and it's been delivered. It's been released to our production system and users can now delight or not in the code that I've just put out to the world. So there's ways to track this stuff, whether it's with GitHub or other tools that we use. I mean, most of what we do is trackable, right? And so what they've seen is that developers spend, are you ready for this? 52 minutes of code time per day, which is crazy. So around 4 hours and 21 minutes is how much code a developer will write during a week, around 4 hours and 21 minutes worth of code. You may be thinking, what? Why the hell are you paid that much if all you're doing is doing this tiny little bit of coding throughout the week? And what people don't realize is what you do as a developer is much more than just writing code, right? You're researching, you're looking at third-party libraries, you're in meetings, which is a reality. You're talking with multiple stakeholders. Basically, somebody wants something. A website has a feature or a bug or something that somebody wants. And your job is to take that idea from them, say, okay, pick their little idea out of their head, translate that into some sort of ticket, some sort of instructions and specifications that any developer on the team could pick up. Somebody will eventually pick that ticket up and then begin actually doing the work to implement it. Sometimes a one-line fix or a one-line feature or maybe like a page worth of code can take a lot of time to figure out. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of what I've done and two very specific examples of recent projects that I've worked on that should illustrate a little bit about why this is the case and really what we do as developers beyond just like sitting there and clicking on a keyboard and writing code. And maybe it'll help you understand why also salaries tend to be pretty high in this profession and why you're more than a glorified typist, because if all you do is write code, if somebody has to tell you exactly how to do things to write the code and give you all the specifications, then you, my friend, are just a glorified typist, and people don't pay a lot of money for that. It's also the reason why I partnered with Zubin, who you've probably heard about by now. He went to Google. He is a self-taught developer. I went to a boot camp, also did quite a lot of self-teaching, and we see that the future is in making more developers that are actual software developers, people that can write code and think properly through really complex problems, because that is not only where the money is at, but it's also where the most joy is at as a developer, if I'm just being honest. Who wants to just be told what to type all day long? If you do, then get into another profession, for sure. Because if you don't want to think and come up with cool ideas or figure out how things work beneath the hood and be genuinely curious, you're not going to last long in this profession, especially now. I think we're over that wave of the boot campification of software where you just needed to be just really surface level knowledge was enough to get by. Those days are behind us. What's going forward are people that are not only generalists, they can write code across many different domains and understand kind of how the bigger picture works, but are able to be deployed into those domains and actually do the work there. Another tangent that I'm on, but if you're curious about working with us, working with me and Zubin, and becoming that kind of software engineer, go to parsity.io/inner-circle. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode, and I want to let you know that becoming a developer in 2025 is not going to look like becoming a developer in 2024. There is an overload of information, AI tools out there, so much conflicting social media BS that it's hard to understand what you really need to do. If you're interested in working with me and my partner Zubin in a very private, exclusive mentorship program where we teach you not just how to code, but how to reinvent yourself as a career changer and help you make a successful transition from your previous life into tech, we want to talk with you. This program is not easy, it is not short, but it is effective. If you want to schedule a talk directly with me or Zubin, just go to the show notes, parsity.io/inner-circle. Back to the show. So let's get to a couple problems which are pretty representative of what you'll see at different companies. Let's start with the startup. I work at a 7-person startup. Maybe it's 10 now. Forget. We hired a few people, whatever. So these problems that we deal with at a startup are really, really nebulous, meaning there's not like a clear-cut, defined problem space. We're basically in that phase of like, how do we make money, right? We have an idea. We have smart people. But how do we make the money part happen? This is really important, right? Because you can make a beautiful site that nobody uses. You can make a wonderful product that nobody wants to pay for. So we really had this problem. We're thinking, how do we get people to pay for the thing we're building? And what we're building is procurement software for people that need to find suppliers to order things. So let's say you're a big company like Walmart or something like that, and you need to find somebody that can supply, I don't know, ice cubes or something in bulk. And you would go to our site ideally, and you'd find this supplier and be like, well, great. And you maybe want to pay money for that service. That's the whole idea. It's a wonderful idea, right? It makes sense. This is a real problem. Big companies do need this addressed, but we're having a bit of a problem. We're thinking, we're not really getting the money and customers that we kind of want. So we got into a meeting and we thought through the problem and did just some brainstorming. So this was a kind of a long meeting, like an hour and a half, 2 hours. Before this meeting, there was other meetings, of course. So there was a bit of like pre-planning before this. We had like some sort of idea of what to look at. Like, here's some things that are working. Here's some things not working. Now let's all think of a plan, right? Each kind of gave our own take on, what could be a thing we should do. Like I said, maybe we should do countdown timers. This is a common tactic on e-commerce sites. Like you have an exploding offer. Like we make you an offer. We say, hey, we'll give you X amount off if you end up buying this product in the next 30 minutes or the next 24 hours or day or month or whatever. And that's a common tactic. And people say, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. Some other person said, what about a new feature that lets you like do this with some data that we have on the platform? People are like, yeah, that's kind of cool. Somebody else is like, hey, what if you do this? So we end up getting all these ideas together, voting on them. And then in order of importance and impact, we decided to rank them. Then we had to get more data on the site. So then we're going to some of our analytics platforms and we're looking at how long do the users spend on this page versus this page? What is the habits of users that tend to buy? Who is having a really good time on this platform versus who is not? What are some things we can kind of put together based on data to have a data-driven approach to this problem? And once we did, we found a few kind of low-hanging fruit and a few higher hanging fruit, making more complex problems to think about that we thought could actually move the needle and get more money. One of those actually ended up being the countdown timer, which was really cool. So I suggested the idea. Other people said, hey, I like that idea. And then the head of engineering wrote up the actual specification for what we were going to do. Because it's not enough to just say, hey, Brian, make a countdown timer. Well, how does that work? How do we know when to start the countdown? What should the countdown be? Is the countdown different for one user versus another user? What if we want to change it? What happens? How do we know the price at the time of the countdown? So we had to think through all these different scenarios. So this takes a while. We had to also work with our designer to talk about what it should look like. What should this countdown timer look like? What should it look like when it gets down to like a minute? What should it look like when it gets down to a day? What should happen when it's at these periods? We also wanted to have like descending offers. Basically, like you get 100% off or you get like 50% off if you come in at this time. If you take our offer at this time, we'll give you 50% off. If you miss that window, the next offer is at 25% off. Next offer is at 10% off. And then it gets down to 0%. So each time you look at that counter, you're incentivized to act quickly, right? And so we had now this idea. This took days to think about, right? And to plan out, to design, to draw. We had to now work at the database level to understand, okay, well, now in the database, what additional information do we need about a user? Turns out we didn't need much besides the time when they signed up. We already had that. Now it was up to me at this point to actually take the design specification, work with the head of engineering, understand what we might need to add to the database. We decided to add a new coupon table. So we add a new table to the database, we work on the data layer, and then it's time for me to actually build the little countdown timer. Building the little countdown timer took, I don't know, a day, maybe a full day of coding, if I'm being honest. A lot of it was spent styling. The actual countdown was really easy to make. It's not complicated to do that. I could have ChatGPT make a countdown timer, right? But the hard part was understanding all the little things, all the little details and nuances about how to make it. And then also, completely honest, the styling is not my strong suit. So styling it took about half the time, really, just to be honest. And I use Tailwind and all that cool stuff. And somebody's out there saying, oh, you should have done whatever you think I should have done. I didn't do it. It took me almost half a day just to style the damn thing. And it's not that crazy. What was the result of doing this thing? So all this planning, all this upfront work, what was the result of this? We had a hockey stick-like curve in the amount of customers that we got based on this and a few other things we were doing. Was this one of the main drivers of it? Not really, but it was a big help in getting more customers and money to the platform. So that was an example of a problem that you'll see at a startup, and then how we went from idea into actual action and building it and releasing it, and then tracking the analytics and data and the numbers and the money, like seeing how much money is coming in and how many customers are seeing it, how many customers are taking the advantage of the 100% versus 50% versus whatever percent, and seeing how they're reacting to this countdown. And we saw it was actually pretty effective. The data told us it was effective, and it was. Now the big Fortune 500 problem. Now this problem is much more boring, right? At a Fortune 500 company, you're not going to be into a room with anybody really and have a big plan for a feature that you're going to launch. That's just not likely to happen. You're mostly told from somebody like, hey, I have an idea. And here's the idea. I want the CEO has this idea. She wants to integrate AI into the platform. What does that mean? I don't know. You figure it out and come back with a proposal and we'll do X. Anyway, here's a much more representative type of feature / problem you'll run into if you work at a larger company. So the problem at this Fortune 500 company I was working at was to integrate reviews into our site. I was working on the Clorox.com, Burt'sBees.com sites that we had, as well as Brita.com. And so we had to integrate reviews into the e-commerce sites. And there was a tool that the company said, you must use this particular tool. They have a relationship with them. They already have contracts with them. They say, you can't just use whatever you want, right? You can't just find something in an NPM package or some library you think is cool. That is absolutely out of the question. The legal team has said, this is the tool you will use. And we were using a new React version of these sites that I was in charge of maintaining and running, essentially. So when we saw this third-party tool, I said, oh, cool. They said, how long do you think this will take for your team to put into production? I said, probably not more than a week, right? Famous last words. Oh, seems easy. Worst thing to ever say. Never say something seems easy. Say, let me get back to you on that. That was a big lesson for me right there. So we spent some time researching. I had the senior engineer on the team do some research, some upfront planning before we got into our actual planning. And this is a common theme on software teams. It's like, hey, do some research. And then after the research, we'll have the real meeting. So that way we don't come in there and just look at a screen for like an hour. That's not fun. So we do some upfront research and planning before you even get to the meeting. So during this research, he found out that this library works great for not React sites, like PHP sites and things like that. It doesn't work so well for React sites at the time we were using. We weren't using Next.js or anything. We're using like Create React app. Your pretty standard React site, right? And it just wasn't going to work as well as I thought. So it actually needed a whole lot of retooling and figuring out, and a lot of like little weird quirks we had to figure out to make it work with a single page application. So my original plan totally fell through. This ended up being like almost a month-long thing, to be honest with you. And because it required more and more meetings, it wasn't just about like, here's the library, now integrate it. It was like, you need API keys. What do you want to use? Production keys? Meaning, if you're a developer working on your local machine and you write a review, should that review actually affect the product that you're making the review for? If it's on your local machine? No, of course not, right? That'd be crazy. So we only want the reviews to work when you're on like the Clorox.com site, not when I'm at localhost, blah, 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 blah. So we had to ask the team there saying, hey, how do we have like different environments? And they were like, oh, well, we don't usually do that. So we had to figure that piece out. we had to go back to the legal team and make a request there. Like, can you ask them and tell them why it's important that we have these two different environments now to do this, right? And then we had to test that it worked locally first, which is doing a POC, which is known as a proof of concept. So it means basically a really janky version just to see how things work. And then we would go forward and make the quote unquote real version. So all this took an incredibly long amount of time, way longer than you'd ever assume, because every single step of the way, you have to ask some other team that's in some other time zone that you don't actually have a relationship with to help you out. And when things don't work as planned and you go through the documentation and you're like, wait, I made the review, I'm not seeing it. What the hell's happening? Why isn't this working as I expect? So then there was meetings with that team. So meetings spawn more meetings, right? And sometimes that's inevitable. Eventually, we got to work with that team and we got to understand what we were doing wrong and some things that we had done right that was also just not working because we weren't familiar with the library. We finally got it integrated. It was on the site and people could make their reviews. It was a very boring project that had a lot of impact because guess what customers love to do on sites? Make reviews. And what do reviews give you? Data about how well a product is being perceived, used, liked, loved, or hated, or whatever. So having the information, super, super important. But was it easy to get? No, not at all. So these are both representative of what you actually do as a developer and kind of why you're paid at this exorbitant amount of money that you can often get as an engineer. It's because you're not just finding a problem that somebody's defined super well for you. You're taking problems that are not defined a lot of times, and at start, the problem is even less defined. So you're taking this undefined problem space and you're consolidating it and condensing it into an actual thing that you can put into production that somebody can use and interact with. That is a really powerful idea if you think about it. Taking an idea, something that's like out there in the space, in the ether, and then boom, you can actually use it and work on it on a website or something like that. Powerful idea. And guess what? It actually makes money. And sometimes it just makes data that can be used to make more money. At the end of the day, all companies are in this game to make money. They're not here to help you or do anything besides try to make as much money as humanly possible. Unfortunately, that is the reality of most companies, right? Unless you work at a nonprofit, for example. But any private company you work for, your code is directly tied to revenue for the most part, or at least to keeping things sustained and afloat so they can get more revenue. So you're in some sort of revenue generating capacity. Don't ever forget that, by the way. You're not just paid to write sexy code. Your code you write is in service of the business to make some cold, hard cash. So I hope that was semi-useful for you to know, because that is actually what you'll be doing as a developer in a regular day-to-day environment. You'll be kind of in charge of something. Now, if you're a really junior developer, I hope I didn't scare you off, because what you'll likely be doing is taking a more defined problem. Somebody more senior will give you a much more defined problem. Like, here, change the color of this button. And I'm not exaggerating at all. This is a common task you might find as a junior developer at a startup or at a Fortune 500. When I had a team full of juniors, one of the first things I had them do was just like a practice project, basically just to teach them how to use Git and like actually work in the system so they could get something into production and go through a review process. And then when they got a little more comfortable, like in week 2 or 3 or 4, I'd give them some actual tasks depending on how, proactive they were. And those tasks would normally involve something like, hey, change the text here, change the color of this button. Maybe if you're working on the reviews thing, help with the CSS and styling and things like that, really kind of low hanging fruit. And then we kind of quickly ramp them up. We'd say, okay, cool. You got that part down. The first ticket or two give you some really, really easy stuff to get your confidence going. And I think of myself as a good manager. I don't know, maybe I wasn't, but I think of myself as a pretty decent manager. Your experience may vary. Sometimes you get thrown right in the fire and it does suck. You're kind of in a sink or swim environment. And that's why it's so important to know how to break down and think about problems. And I'm going to go over that in another episode, a step-by-step process that I use to actually break down and think about problems. It's kind of the same strategy that I've been using for the last 10, 11 years to understand how long it's going to take me to do something, break it down step by step by step, and get a good idea of what I should be doing when I don't know what the hell I should be doing. So I can't wait to go over that episode for you. It's also going to be an article. That should be a really fun one because I know a lot of people have been asking about that. Like, how do you break down a problem as a developer? How do you work through a problem? And whether it's a data structure and algorithm problem or a feature at work, I kind of take the same approach. That maybe it's just me, but I was talking to a dude today on the phone about that, and I can't wait to share that with you. Anyway, hope that's helpful. And if you're serious about becoming a software engineer in the year 2025, join me and Zubin at the Inner Circle at Parsity, parsity.io/inner-circle. We are only taking a few people this quarter to work with extensively one-on-one. We're not just going to teach you how to code. That is certainly part of it. We're going to teach you much more how to reinvent yourself as a software developer, how to think critically, how to have the habits and personal development skills that you need in order to learn all this hard stuff. That sounds cool? Join us. See ya. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you're serious about switching careers and becoming a software developer and building complex software and want to work directly with me and my team, go to Parsity.io. And if you want more information, feel free to schedule a chat by just clicking the link in the show notes. See you next week.